So I'm recording. You heard that. We are now recording this session, and we'll have a little QA at the end of this. And then after the QA for Melissa, we'll have some additional time if anyone wants to stay on with me and ask me questions about the RDA toolkit site migration and issues related to that site migration. So without further ado, application profiles, a deeper dive in how not to drown with Melissa Parent. Take it away, Melissa.
Thank you, Jamie. So it's really nice to see everybody today. Of course, I can't see anybody, but any opportunity to talk about application profiles is something that I'm really happy about. I'm very not technical, and I think in the first iteration of this webinar, I said the same thing, and I'm going to say it again, is that I'm not a super technical person. So if you are a very technical person and you're watching this, you might think, oh, some of the challenges that Melissa's talking about are not challenges at all. And it's just maybe just a challenge for me. But that said, I think there is value in talking about application profiles, and certainly while I have been engaged in application profile work for a few months now, there's been times at which I felt like I was drowning. There were times that it just didn't seem like I was making progress or I was making good decisions. And I'm really keen to talk about those challenges, like my little whirlpools, so that you don't have to go through the same thing. Okay then, so just a brief outline of today. Today I'm going to talk about some key information, just an overview of the application profile basics, how to get started, how to refocus if you have gotten started and are in a whirlpool, possibly drowning, and then general advice. But throughout this webinar, I will be talking about whirlpools, and I chose the whirlpools because I thought I'd continue on this sort of watery theme. So whirlpools are those trouble spots where it seems like you get quite challenged and maybe aren't sure how to proceed. Whirlpools, and these are not the only ones, but these are sort of the themes that have emerged for me in doing the application profile work that I've done, is the role of entity-based application profiles, how to work with coherent and minimum description, and consistently the impact of an implementation scenario. Okay, now, application profile basics. Just to recap a little bit, which just very briefly at this slide, as application profiles are mentioned multiple places throughout the RDA toolkit. They are mentioned on each entity page. They, of course, have a glossary entry, and then throughout the guidance chapter, there are references to application profiles. They really do pop up in a lot of places in the toolkit. But the, not surprisingly, the most comprehensive place to get information about application profiles is in the guidance chapter, where there is a whole chapter that is devoted to application profiles. So here are just the basics. On the application profile page that's in the guidance section, there's a whole sets of paragraphs that define what an application profile, describe and define what an application profile is. And this is just a little dot point summary of those points. So an application profile specifies the RDA entities that may be included and their repeatability, right? An AP also specifies the RDA elements that may be included and their repeatability. The guidance chapter on application profile says that minimum description requirements must be met. The guidance chapter also talks about how an application profile defines the recording method that can be used for each element that you define. And a bit about recording methods. Sometimes I just sort of gamble on, but I thought I would pause here just a little bit to recap on the different recording methods. So in the toolkit, there are 4 different recording methods that are available. Not all of them apply to each specific element, but the toolkit tells you when a recording method doesn't apply to a particular element. Those recording methods are unstructured, which is when you've got no attempt to structure the text, you're not using control vocabulary. There's also the structured recording method where you are using control vocabulary or you are structuring the text in some way. For example, when we invert names. So if we have like surname, comma, space, given name, that's a structured description. There's also the identifier recording method. Identifiers, when I hear identifier, I'm thinking ISBN, ISSN, but it's much more than that. Generally, whenever we're using codes for things, in addition to ISBNs and ISSNs, but when we're using codes for things, then that is an identifier recording method. And then finally, there's the IRI recording method, which at some point I would love to be able to apply, but in my current implementation scenario, no. Going back to the basics of application profiles, we've got the fact that your application profile will specify a vocabulary encoding scheme and or a string encoding scheme for per element, but a little asterisk there because this is, you're only going to apply a vocabulary encoding scheme or a string encoding scheme to a structured, if you've chosen the structured description method. And finally, there's also the AP specifies if you're going to, what transcription method you're going to use. Is it going to be basic? Is it going to be normalized? Is it going to be another kind of transcription? And asterisks beside that, because transcription method is only going to be need to be specified if you've decided that you're going to use an unstructured recording method for an element. Okay, now, you see that there's some whirlpools here. There are some whirlpools here, which might be a little bit surprising because these whirlpools are places where I've grappled with making sure that my application profiles meet the specifications that the toolkit outlines. And I'm going to go into a really busy, and I apologize for this busy slide, but one of the whirlpools that is an important whirlpool is about how an AP has to meet minimum description requirements. So just a little recap on minimum description. And this is in the guidance resource description chapter. Little snippets here. So minimum description has to be coherent. So coherent, which is on the left side of the screen, is very much, and again, I'm not technical, so I might be saying things a little bit wrong, but it seems to me that coherent description is very much about the primary relationships that exist between entities, and particularly WEMI, sorry, work, expression, manifestation, and item, and that there's particular relationships between works, expressions, manifestations, and items. And generally, I think this is really good background information for us as resource description practitioners or catalogers. It's just sort of background information, which I think is best sort of tucked away in general EFLA LRM knowledge. I cannot stress this enough, just as an aside, separate from application profiles, but just generally, if you're engaging with the new RDA toolkit, at least a little bit of familiarity, just a touch of familiarity with the EFLA LRM serves you so strongly. So with EFLA LRM sort of background, coherent description sits, general knowledge of coherent description sort of sits in that category of like stuff that's good to have, but it doesn't really practically apply. It's just, it sort of filters, it's back there. But coherent description does have this interesting intersect with minimum description of a manifestation, actually of any entity, any resource, information resource. So minimum description of a work, expression, manifestation, item, they're all in the toolkit, but I've focused on minimum description of a manifestation because that's generally where we spend most of our time. So minimum description, because again, application profiles say that your AP, you have to meet minimum description requirements. So let's make sure that we're quite clear on what they are. If you're describing a manifestation, you have to have manifestation, appellation of manifestation, or instead of defining appellation of manifestation, you can have title of manifestation or title proper, or you can have an access point for the manifestation or an authorized access point for the manifestation. All of those elements, the title of manifestation, title proper, access point, authorized access point for manifestation, they're all, I don't want to use the word narrower elements, but they all sort of group under appellation of manifestation. They're all a kind of appellation. They're all a kind of way of naming a manifestation. You can also use an identifier for manifestation, but in our scenarios, generally, I guess we wouldn't do that because it wouldn't necessarily be as useful for the user. So that first chunk of the minimum description of a manifestation is basically saying you have to name your manifestation some way. You have to give it a name. So that's basic. You need to have that. But then in a minimum description of a manifestation, you also have to have a value. So you also have to have manifestation, expression manifested, using a value of expression, appellation of expression, or any of those sort of like other more refined ways of giving an expression appellation, giving an expression a name. So in your manifestation, minimum description of a manifestation, you need to have a name for your manifestation, and you have to name the expression that is manifested. Or, interesting, there's an or here, or in addition to having the name of your manifestation, you have to have a name, or you have to name the work that is manifested. And that's that third block. So you have to name the manifestation, and you have to give a name of some sort, be it an appellation, authorized access point, what have you. You also have to name the expression that is manifested or the work that is manifested. Okay, sorry, I really need to do that little bit there because minimum description and how to work that into my application profiles really, it was a big whirlpool for me. And we're going to come back to this. So it's a little bit more practical, like how did this trip me up? We'll come back to this, but okay, moving on. Another little whirlpool here about talking about the RDA entities that may be included and their repeatability. Because that's, point number one in the application profiles guidance is an application profile specifies the RDA entities that may be included and their repeatability. So here's where our implementation scenario really kicked in for me. So scenario C, I realized as I put that up there, who's going to be, oh yeah, scenario C, RDA implementation scenario. Got it. Don't worry. There's a whole chapter in guidance about implementation scenarios. And scenario C is for if you're in a MARC, bibliographic, and authority environment. If you are, and that's scenario C. If you are in a MARC, bibliographic, and authority implementation environment, so you're working within MARC, but you're trying to implement RDA, you can trust that your AP work will be good enough no matter what you do, and that you'll meet this requirement or specification that RDA entities, you have to define the RDA entities that may be included and their repeatability. Trust that you're going to do that, but that's pretty much an artifact of what our current practice is. When we are describing, when we're describing an information resource, I'm just going to go with the book because it's easiest. If there is an expression that is manifested in that, say it's a translation, we automatically, effectively, if we're thinking about our users, we are going to include an access point or at least some sort of description of that expression. That's what the MARC 240 is with the $L. So meeting that work expression manifestation item requirements, it's kind of just going to happen within our normal manifestation records. And when it comes to the other entities, the non-WEMI entities, that's authority work is kind of going to, the stuff that we already do when we're creating authority records, we're going to be creating authorities for agents, for persons, for families. We're going to be creating authorities for places, and maybe less so for time spans. So if you're working within the MARC bibliographic authority environment, you're going to be okay. No matter what you do with your APs, you're going to meet this requirement. If you're in a non-MARC implementation, you're going to have to think about this a little bit more, because you won't have the sort of support that is automatically just sort of granted to us in a MARC bibliographic environment, bibliographic authority environment, because MARC bibliographic authority environments, we have this legacy of, centuries of practice, maybe not MARC, okay, decades of practice using, expressing entities and relationships using MARC. If you're in a linked data environment, which is scenario A, or if you are in a relational database environment, scenario C, or if you're in a flat file environment, and I think hopefully very few of us are in that environment because it's kind of limiting, then that, which is scenario D, then you're going to have to think a little bit more carefully to make sure that your application profiles capture all the entities that you want to capture. So I can't speak as well to those because that's not my implementation environment, but automatically thinking, so if I was in a linked data implementation, and how would I capture and make sure that I had all of the entities and their repeatability? And I'm like, oh, that's going to take some time. So implementation of scenario has an impact on that first requirement. Implementation scenario, another whirlpool, has a huge whirlpool around the elements that may be included and the repeatability. This one has been driving me absolutely bonkers. In fact, I had to hide, later I can show you a little snippet of the application profiles that I've got, but I essentially had to hide a column of my application profile work, which is all in Excel. You should always use Excel, because the repeatability, like whether or not an element could be repeated, was driving me nuts. Because the question is, do you define that an element is repeatable according to its MARC repeatability? Because MARC, MARC talks about whether or not you can repeat elements. RDA does not. Well, aside from Coherent, anyway. But thinking about, okay, well, say I am creating an application profile, sets of application profiles that are going to be used in a MARC implementation. So how do I pitch that repeatability? And I really want to cast that repeatability according to RDA, but then is that going to confuse practitioners? And depending on how we get the application profiles and start using them with the toolkit, is that repeatability saying that all these elements are repeatable when MARC says that they're not? Is this just going to be confusing? So I don't have any answers on that. I've hidden the column for now. I'm just like, I'm not paying attention to it. I will pay attention to, whether an element must be included or may be included, mandatory or mandatory, applicable or optional. But as for repeatability, I'm just not ready to deal with that yet. However, flip side, non-MARC implementations. So if you're in a linked data implementation or a linked data implementation or relational database implementation or a flat file implementation, you can trust that your AP work will be good enough. Because again, RDA doesn't talk to this element. Well, there are a few things that you can only have one. Very few. But RDA has a lot more flexibility around whether or not an element is repeatable. So you pretty much whatever you decide is going to be good enough. It's us who are working in MARC that are going to be stymied by repeatability or not repeatable, repeatable or not repeatable. Okay, back to about how minimum description requirements. So this is, all that blah, blah, blah about what minimum description is. This has come back and I still don't have a great solution at this point yet, but it's really thrown me. Should just to make sure that my application profile meets minimum description requirements, then I believe that I should have, I should include at least the elements for appellation of expression and appellation of work to make sure that they are mandatory if applicable. So this is just a little snip, so I have to move. Just a little snip of a few rows out of many rows of an application profile that I've developed for monographs. And I've included the mark alignments because the mark alignment is, it's quite useful for me to see how this RDA element is going to map, or is going to be displayed or encoded in my metadata environment. But, and of course, to meet the minimum description of a manifestation, I've made title proper mandatory. You have to give this a title. I debated about whether or not to make it title of manifestation, which is a broader element, but ultimately I decided, no, let's be granular. Everything is going to have a title proper, even if it's a devised title proper, but everything's going to have a title proper. So let's be very specific and say, yeah, to meet the minimum requirement of giving a manifestation a name, we're going to use title proper. Awesome. But then capturing appellation of expression and appellation of work, I feel like I should put them in the application profile, but they don't have a mark alignment. So they're in there, but how functional are they? I don't know yet. And then, so that was one thing. And then the fact that there's no mark alignment when I'm including these appellation of expression and work elements. But there's also the fact that there's dumbing up limitations. Yes, machines can, oh, I think I might have gotten that backwards. It should be dumbing down. I'm not sure, but basically, if there's some things that machines can do and some things that machines can't do. So say that I record authorized access point for expression. Instead of using this appellation of expression, I actually record a value for authorized access point of expression. But in my profile, application profile, I've said that I'm going to provide a value of appellation of expression. I'm not sure that all the granularity, the rich detail of authorized access point for expression will be interpreted or, actionable if my application profile is expecting, I'm just giving it an appellation of expression. Like maybe like whatever I'm telling the machine that I should give it, in which case, maybe instead of defining appellation of expression, I should define the narrower elements and say, instead of just having appellation of expression, should have authorized access point for expression or access point for expression or title of expression, and then having 3 different mandatory if applicable elements in place of just this one appellation of expression. I'm not technical, I don't know. So yeah, if anybody has any advice on that, I think I'd love to hear it. Okay, now, something, did you hear that? Let me just go, oh, right, there we go. Back to the slideshow. Okay, so those were some whirlpools, and hopefully they weren't terrifying whirlpools, and hopefully I've explained them in some fashion that if you encounter them, you won't feel alone and you won't start to drown like I did. So all that aside, let's talk about some practical advice about getting started, because getting started is the hardest part, and you just, if you know how to get in there, you just get in, get going, and it's great. So regardless of your implementation scenario, here's a pretty, this is the method that's kind of been working for me, but I have heard of another approach, which I will discuss. And so step 1, just check out what application profiles are out there for your intended metadata environment now. So I'm in a MARC 21, sorry, MARC authority and bibliographic scenario. And I'm in Australia. We contribute to the Australian National Bibliographic Database. So I consulted their minimum data requirements. In North America, I can't speak to what Library and Archives Canada might have, or if Library and Archives Canada kind of does what goes with PCC. But PCC, the standard, the BibCo BSR, Bibliographic Standard Record, that's an application profile that is worth having a look at. And I think in New Zealand that there would be some cataloging guidelines that are issued for Tipuna. So check out what's out there. And if you're not in a MARC environment, then there are plenty of application profiles that work with other metadata element sets. You could always look at other metadata element sets and go, okay, well, they've got title, they've got creator, they've got contributor, they've got publication information, right? And that can just sort of provide that context for, okay, which elements am I going to define? So you've got your elements that you've got from another application profile, and then it's time to map the elements to new RDA, map the elements to RDA elements. And yes, and there is some challenge in that, which I will talk about in the next slide. There's a bit of a back and forth that you're going to do between mapping the elements to the new RDA elements. And while you're doing that, you're going to have to make a decision about, are you going to do format-based or entity-based APs or a mix of both? And again, we've got some role pools to say, oh, these are challenging places. And there's a bit of an interplay where you're doing the mapping and then you're thinking, okay, I'm going to do format-based. Or you're doing the mapping, you're like, oh no, I've got this challenge around doing format-based, maybe I'll do entity-based instead. So you just take some time. Eventually you'll pick one and stick with it, or just pick a mix and stick with that. And then finally, after you got something working, show it to your practitioners. What's missing? And here's where the MARC alignments, they're useful. They are useful because it helps people to, instead of thinking in terms of RDA elements, have that real shorthand about, well, what am I recording in the MARC? I mean, of course, what they're recording in the MARC is an RDA element, but that MARC coding really kind of gives it a signpost that is really easy to understand. Okay, so, sorry, let's move on here. Mapping elements to current RDA. Some of them are easy. Some of them are so easy, it's just come across one-to-one. From the original toolkit, place publication, bang, place publication, same. Other elements have been redefined for good reasons, either to make them more LRM compliant or because the definition of the scope and definition of the element in the original toolkit actually conflated a number of concepts. So they've been separated out into separate concepts, which each get their own element. For example, scale. Scale is one of the hardest elements for me. My maps catalogers who are engaging in maps application profile development with me, yeah, they know how horrible and how much of a struggle I'm having with scale, but partly because scale did this explosion. So we had scale, now we have multiple elements that were kind of subsumed under scale previously. And the advice here is you have to use the element scope and definition when you're choosing the AP elements. So there comes a bit of interrogation and really thinking about well, what are we actually trying to record? If we record scale, are we only recording scale, like the actual numbers? Or are we doing a scale designation when there's more, when we're putting more context around the just the raw scale information? Are we recording information that is even different from either of those? And it's a real think piece, but it's also really fun because you get to really think about what are we recording and why are we recording it for our users. It's not always easy, but it is definitely rewarding, and it gives you a wonderful opportunity to spend more time looking in the toolkit and really thinking about the definition scope of elements, and also really having a good think about domain and range as well. That comes into play as well. And this is an aside. Excuse me, this is an aside more than anything, but I did want to just chuck it in here because it became something that was challenging for me when I was first engaging with application profile development. There are a number of places throughout the toolkit. There are a number of places where in the recording section, some of the first text is record this element as a value of ... So we get some examples of record this element as a value of place, appellation of place. And that's text that you can see at place of publication. At the name of publisher element in the recording section, we find the text, record this element as a value of agent, appellation of agent. And similarly at date of publication, you find the text at recording that says, record this element as a value of time span, appellation of time span. And even more fearful, throughout a number of places, you get record this element as a value of a nomen string. And so when I was developing my application profiles, I was like, wait, so if I'm, and it's like, now that I think through it, I'm like, okay, if I'm recording place of publication, does that mean I also need to define place, appellation of place? Like, because it says to record this element as a value of place, appellation of place. And similarly, for name of publisher, should I be defining in my application profile both name publisher, both name of publisher and also agent, appellation of agent? And this took me a few days to work through. My brain moved a little bit slowly, but it's like, wait, this text, I'm covering this off because I don't have to record both name of publisher and agent, appellation of agent, because the recording method decision at the element, so in the element, when you have the choice of recording it, and sometimes you don't have the choice, but you have the choice of recording it in a structured, unstructured, identifier or IRI method. When you're making that decision, you're actually making a decision to somehow record either the name of publisher, the agent, or the time span. You're actually recording them as an appellation of place, agent, or time span, just using the sort of narrower elements. So you actually don't have to, in your application profile, sort of double up. You do not have to define both place of publication and place appellation of place. The value that you are going to actually record for the name of publisher or place of publication is going to be an appellation of agent or an appellation of place or one of those narrower sub-elements. So don't be thrown by that text when you're developing your application profiles. You don't have to define all these appellation elements. You just don't within a manifestation sort of format-based application profile. Okay. Another whirlpool. Another whirlpool is about whether or not you're going to use format or entity-based application profiles. Pros and cons, pros and cons. If you are using format-based, which is to say developing application profiles, manifestation application profiles that include the minimum requirements to include a work appellation of work or expression appellation of expression element, if applicable, then so you've defined using manifestation, manifestation level application profiles, and you can have them based on formats like one for monos, one for diachronics, one for cartographic images, and having them like that in conjunction with having entity-based APs, which would cover off the work that you do with authorities when you're describing a person, when you're describing a family, a corporate body, a place or time span. It would make sense to have those be more entity-based application profiles rather than format-based, because you can't format that just doesn't work. So when you're doing format-based manifestation application profiles, then you can really focus in you can totally focus in on all the elements that you need for that particular format. Like it really gives you a laser focus, which also helps you to create a really easy snapshot of the elements that you've defined, and it's much easier to conceptualize. It's just so much easier to conceptualize. However, there are echoes of AACR in deciding to do format-based manifestation level application profiles that include work and expression elements as required. Yeah, doesn't that feel a little bit like AACR? And I'm like, yeah, it's working for me, but I do feel a little bit guilty at sticking with format at this point, because kind of we were trying to move away from format. Also, when you're doing format-based application profiles, you are duplicating some of your work, because title proper, like there's going to be elements that are common across all of the formats. So yeah, it kind of feels a bit silly to be like, oh gosh, I'm defining title proper again. But it does give you a chance to go back into those element pages again and again and again and again. So you get very familiar with the elements, even as you're duplicating your AP development. And again, with the, with format-based application profiles, you can't forget about the non-WEMI entities. And again, in a MARC environment, just because of authority records, you're not going to forget about all the non-WEMI entities. You can't, but you're going to have to, you can't create a format-based application profile for an agent. Agents don't have formats. So if you are doing format-based manifestation application profiles, you also have to create the application profiles for the non-WEMI entities. So that's just a little bit of extra. Okay, but again, the non-WEMI entities, I'm just putting, this is a challenge for any AP developer. And I think kind of possibly regardless of your implementation scenario as well, because this is authority work. Essentially, you are defining how you're going to, which elements you may include, their repeatability. You're really defining your authority records. And I'm saying this is a challenge for any AP developer. Maybe it's not if you have a good, strong background in authority work. I have limited experience working with authorities. So despite the fact that I've got a couple of catalogers in my team sort of being like, yeah, what about persons? What about corporate bodies? I need to know what to do with corporate bodies. I'm like, I'm not ready yet. But although I've said making those application profiles for non-WEMI entities could be a challenge for anybody, maybe it won't be for you, but for me, extreme whirlpool, and one that I'm just sort of circling around and haven't even gone in yet. Alrighty. How about if you are trying to refocus your AP work? Say you've done your work, you started, you're in it, and you need to refocus. Got a few little tips for that. And it's like, find your whirlpools. Where are you stuck? Are you clear about your implementation scenario? Like, are you really, and I know this is like, you know what your implementation scenario is, but have you sort of thought about the fact that given a particular implementation scenario, there are some things that you do or don't have to think about. So for example, if you are in a linked data scenario, you're not going to have to worry so much about repeatability versus if you're in a MARC scenario, you're going to have to think about, how do I deal with repeatability of elements? Because isn't it going to be according to MARC, or is it going to be according to RDA? So, and that gets its own point here. So if you're in scenario C, have you decided how you're going to handle repeatability? Because I haven't, I've just hidden it. As no, not even thinking about that anymore because it's too messy. So not even thinking about it yet or anymore. But if you're stuck, do what I did. Just don't think about it for now. Just continue on with the other work, and then maybe there'll be a brainwave, or I don't know, you'll pick a way to go and be consistent with it. The grappling with recording X as a value of, be stuck there? Because we're you're okay. You don't have to get stuck there because you actually don't have to record. If an element tells you to record it as a value of an appellation element or a nomen string, that doesn't mean that your profile, if you're doing format-based application profiles, doesn't mean that you're going to have to include appellation or nomen within your application profile. You're going to be okay. Are you stuck with the non-WEMI elements? Are you stuck? I can't give you too much advice there because and in fact, if you're grappling with the non-WEMI elements, I'd really like to hear from you because I'm going to have to bite the bullet and start doing non-WEMI elements. Oh, I meant to say entities there. I'm sorry, non-WEMI entities. Yes, I'd like to hear from you if you're dealing application profiles for the non-WEMI entities because I'm going to need help. And the final thing is, are you using the right tools? Like, this is a really basic thing, but the way that you're structuring your work is going to help you. General advice. I'm just looking at the time. Yes. And this is really general advice. The first advice I want to say is just trust yourself. And if you can engage them with your catalogers as well. Because this is developing application profiles is hard work. It can be quite theoretical at the same time as you're trying to make it very practical. It is hard work, but we know our users, and there's just not, even given all of the specifications that an application profile has to have, you're not going to get it that wrong. So long as you're trying to create application profiles that result in descriptions that help your users, you're really not going to go that bad, go wrong because, well, I mean, you might get little things a little bit not quite right, but basically user needs haven't changed. And so because user needs haven't changed, as long as we're paying attention to user needs, then we're going to be okay. Also, really general advice, get it wrong, go ahead, get it wrong. Just give yourself time to get it wrong and then refine it. I've been tinkering, I shouldn't say tinkering, I've been actively working on application profiles for months, a couple of months now. More than a couple of months. I did down tools for a little bit, but it takes time. It does take time, and you can't be afraid of doing a body of work, sitting back and looking at it and going, I think I got that all wrong. Like, for example, I had a lot of difficulty around aligning title of series and part of work. I had a lot of challenges around title of series and part of work. And at one point I was like, I got it all wrong and I have to go back and fix it all. It happens. Use Excel. Goodness gracious, please use Excel. It is don't do anything other than Excel because of those beautiful filters that you can apply in Excel. It's just so much use to be able to refine and create sets of elements to look at particular aspects, like, oh, did I define all of these as mandatory if applicable? Did I accidentally define some of these as optional? Boop, filter, and you can see. And other really general advice, and it's a bit sneaky, but there is appetite for somehow making sure that application profiles, if they're not part of the toolkit, that there's some integration between the application profiles and how we engage with the toolkit. So that's a bit of a watch this space. So you'll check that out in the coming months. And that is me. Yes, right on time.
Well done. Thank you, Melissa. We do have one question to kick us off here, and then if anyone else wants to jump in with questions, you can type them into the question and answer area or the chat. So the first one is from Ian. He says, the PCC case is an interesting one for APs. Mark, but moving to BibFrame. How do we represent expression as an entity in the linked data environment? Is this a representative expression? And if so, how does it differ from a BibFrame work? When will we have mappings to BibFrame as well as Mark?
Yeah, okay, right. I cannot answer. Ian, that's nice. I can't talk about BibFrame because I've kind of gone the RDA and MARC way rather than paying much attention to BibFrame. Really in Oceania, BibFrame's like we've heard about it, but it's just not as present for us. So I cannot say how do you represent, and also representing expression as an entity. Is it a representative expression? How does it differ from the BIB framework? I don't know. As for when we will have mappings to BibFrame as well as MARC, I am not certain. I know that they're in the wings. And I believe there might be a working group that is looking at that, I believe. So that's not a very informative answer, Ian, I'm sorry.
I'll just point out that we do hope to create a tool that will help support folks doing mapping to RDA from whether it is MARC or BibFrame or Dublin Core or anything else. Daijin Sun asks, any good training materials developed already?
No.
There you go. Disappointing as it may sound. Lloyd asks, why is an application profile being created at the state level? Shouldn't this be happening at the national level? Is Victoria going to be so different from other states?
Well, that's interesting. So yeah, good question, Lloyd. No, Victoria is not going to be so different from the other states. And ideally, there would be application work that is happening at the national level, but I've just sort of like, somebody's got to go first. And so my organization as being, very supportive of being like, yeah, let's go first, Melissa, you go ahead, go do application profiles and policy statements. And my plan is to do them, test them out, share them with the other national state libraries and just have that as a starting point. And that might cause us, once we have, there's been shared and we've all had feedback, then it might trigger going back to the state Victoria and tweaking the application profiles there to bring them in line with the other national state libraries in Australia. But I just needed to, somebody's got to go first. And I was tired of waiting.
Good for you. Take the initiative. So right now, I don't have any other questions. I will, oh, here comes one. Are there any pointers to good resources to learn more about APs? This comes from Daijin Sun again, who's clearly looking for some assistance here.
Yes, I think to learn more about application profiles, about RDA application profiles, RDA application profiles, the BibCo, the PCC BibCo BSR, that's a resource that is an application profile that was designed with the original toolkit in mind. But as for current application profiles for the current toolkit, we don't really have any resources per se. So just generally learning more about application profiles, best thing is to sort of look at examples. There's the BibCo BSR. There's also the Dublin Core application profile. And another example of an application profile is the VRA Core. That just comes to mind as well, the VRA Core metadata application profile. So just looking at examples is the best way to start. I hope that answers your question.
Okay. Thank you. Here comes one. What would be the pros and cons of doing entity-based application profiles? I mean, is there anything different as opposed to pros and cons of format-based application profiles? That comes from Susie.
I started doing that, Susie, and I think it was just the way my mind works. I found it harder to conceptualize and see that, okay, I'm describing a manifestation. I'm describing a manifestation. Okay, so if that manifestation is a book, what elements do I need? And if it's a map, what elements do I need? And it's possible to do it that way. And I don't think there would be any actual cons to doing it that way, but I just found it very difficult to sort of conceptualize and make sure that I was getting all the elements that I needed when I did started with purely entity-based application profiles. Yeah, it's just like so much information. Thanks, Susie.
Okay. So you can continue to ask questions of Melissa, or I'll also open it up to questions about the RDA toolkit and the recent migration, if people have any questions regarding that. A couple of people have pointed out, one person has pointed out that the RDA lab course that we've run does cover application profiles. And I think if you go to the RDA steering committee's website, which is, I believe, rda-rsc.org, they have a presentations area, and there might be some old presentations about application profiles that are a little more on the theoretical side, not quite as a practical approach as Melissa's presented. And Thomas also asked if we'll be sharing a recording of this session. Yes, we will. We will be sharing both the recording and the slides. And here comes, can you remind us the next update to the when the next update to the toolkit will be and what we can expect to be in it? That's a question for me. Here, I'll turn it on to be.
Should I turn off my sharing, Jamie?
If you can leave it up, I think that's fine. I'm just going to turn on my video so people can see me, and it's just not you. So I think you can see me now. Hopefully you do. So Bob asked when the next release to the toolkit will be and what will be in it. The next toolkit release is scheduled for March 23rd, I think. We usually keep these schedules in-house because they can shift around because life is complicated and one never knows when things are going to turn. That release should include the addition of some new elements and deprecation of old ones related to the collection set, I think is what we call it, the collection set elements, which will be of most interest to, I believe, archival users. And then there's some other changes involved as well, but I can't go into a lot of detail about it right now. Linda might be able, collection level description there. Linda chimed in with a better statement of what the contents will be. Will the Concur cataloging manual updates be published in the toolkit? Rebecca asks. I don't know about that. We haven't had Concur cataloging manual updates in the toolkit before, so I don't expect them to be. And Bob asked, will there be additions to new policy statements? Yes, policy statements will be updated. I expect new policy statements from LCPCC, from British Library, and from the Music Library Association. And I think Linda just chimed in. Linda is our RSC secretary who's attending this. So look for her in chat. She'll always have good stuff to tell you. Collection level, she may be thinking of Cataloger's desktop. We'll share the update with the folks at Cataloger's desktop, and they'll do the appropriate mapping to the toolkit that they usually do. I also wanted to just inform everyone that I did, last week I was supposed to do a demo of logging into the toolkit and other issues related to the site migration. I had to cancel that because of some personal issues, but I did record that presentation and was posted yesterday. I will put in here, let me just pop this in real quick. I'm going to put in the chat the link to that recording and encourage folks. I know a lot of folks have had issues with access over the past month. I know I have. So this webinar, I guess you could call it, or presentation, it's a little less than 30 minutes, and it goes over all the related issues. But that said, I'm happy to address any questions anyone might have on that topic. And of course, the floor is still open to Melissa, if anyone else has questions. All right. I'm not seeing anything, so I'll give everyone 15 more seconds. Yeah. Oh, I posted the link to hosts and panelists accidentally. Let me do that to everybody. Sorry. Thank you for clarifying that, Charlotte. To everyone. That's who I want to send that to. There, you should see the link now. And Ramon backed me up on that too. So everyone should have that now. I'm just trying to check if there's. I did see Thomas's question. I think it was about recording, and this session is recorded and will be shared on the YouTube channel in probably tomorrow, sometime tomorrow, or over the weekend. I'll get it up if I don't get it tomorrow. All right. If there are any other questions, otherwise I will bid everyone adieu. I will thank Melissa for doing this again and congratulate her on an excellent presentation. And I'm not sure what we have lined up actually at this moment for our next webinar. I don't know if Ramon wants to chat in there what our, if we have a webinar lined up for next month and what the topic will be. But thank you everyone for attending this one, and we'll get the slides and the recording up as soon as possible. The next one will be a NARDEC update form. That'll be great. Those are always very useful. So thanks everyone. Bye-bye.